The final act has not yet begun, but its shape is already written in the dust. Berlin's Dying Heart, by April 28, 1945. Berlin is an inferno. From the roof of the Reich Chancellery, one can see nothing but smoke, the black and orange churn of burning neighborhoods stretching to the horizon. Entire city blocks vanish overnight under artillery bombardment. The Soviets now fight street by street, house by house. Tanks push through avenues filled with rubble, their tracks grinding over the cobblestones of Unter den Linden. Machine gun nests are set up in apartment windows, cellars turned into bunkers. Civilians, the few still alive, shelter in subway tunnels flooded with groundwater and corpses. Soviet loudspeakers echo across the ruins. "Soldiers of Berlin, lay down your arms." The response is silence, or the sharp crack of a rifle fired from a shattered window. Hitler's empire has collapsed to a few square kilometers. The government quarter around Wilhelmstrasse and the Tiergarten remains the last stronghold. Above ground, the Reich Chancellery is barely recognizable, its marble halls reduced to wreckage, the once grand mosaic floors littered with glass and broken portraits. And beneath it, 30 feet down, Hitler's bunker hums on. The political endgame, while the shells fall, Hitler receives one last betrayal. On April 23, Hermann Göring, then in Bavaria, sends a telegram asking if he should assume leadership, citing Hitler's isolation in besieged Berlin as justification. The message, polite but decisive, is intercepted by Martin Bormann, who interprets it as an attempted coup. Hitler's reaction is explosive. He orders Göring's arrest, stripping him of all offices. Days later, reports arrive that Heinrich Himmler, head of the SS, is secretly negotiating surrender terms with the Western Allies through Count Bernadotte of Sweden. To Hitler, these are not political acts, they are treason. He rants for hours, trembling, eyes sunk deep with exhaustion. The men who built his empire, the ones he had trusted most, are now conspiring to end it without him. He turns to those still loyal, Goebbels, Bormann, Bergdorf, and declares his intention. "I will remain in Berlin. I will not leave. I will fight to the end." The decision seals the fate of everyone in the bunker. The rhythm. Underground time begins to blur. There is no day or night, only the dull flicker of electric bulbs. The air smells of oil and damp paper. Meals are irregular, simple vegetable dishes, canned food, coffee brewed from ersatz grains. Water is rationed. Cigarette smoke lingers in every corridor. Between briefings, secretaries type up last-minute orders, promotions, and commendations that will never be delivered. Goebbels still issues propaganda bulletins for radio transmission, though few outside can still hear them. In the evenings, Hitler listens to military reports delivered by General Krebs, nodding slowly, asking questions that no longer have answers. The tone in the bunker has shifted. Where once there was tension and defiance, there is now a heavy calm. The staff speak in whispers. Some laugh nervously. Others avoid eye contact. Outside, the explosions are constant, distant at first, then close enough to rattle dishes on the tables. Each thud reminds them that the Soviet line is now less than a kilometer away. Faith and fatalism. In these last days, religion reappears in odd ways. Magda Goebbels prays with her children each night. One of the secretaries recalls her speaking softly about salvation from this world of sin. For others, belief has turned to fatalism. Many cling to the illusion that the Western Allies will soon arrive to fight the Soviets, that Berlin might be divided before the Red Army takes it. But even this hope fades as radio signals from outside the city vanish one by one. On April 27th, Hitler receives word that Field Marshal Keitel can no longer contact Army Group Vistula. The supposed relief forces under General Wenck are halted at the River Elbe, more than 70 kilometers away. The map shows it clearly. No rescue is coming. That evening, Hitler speaks quietly to his staff. He says that he will not be captured by the enemy. He has decided his course. The atmosphere after that moment is described by witnesses as weirdly peaceful. There are no more arguments, no more outbursts, only the slow acceptance that everything, the war, the Reich, their lives, is ending. The city at night outside, Berlin glows red under the bombardment. Soviet artillery lights the sky in bursts. The Tiergarten's trees burn like torches. From the bunker's upper stairwell, orderlies can see the Chancellery garden cratered and lifeless. Hitler's adjutants risk brief trips above ground to deliver messages or fetch supplies. Some never return. Others describe surreal scenes. Volkssturm units firing from the ruins of cafes. SS men directing tanks down boulevards that no longer exist. Civilians wandering aimlessly through the smoke. One courier reports that the Soviets are now less than 500 meters from the Brandenburg Gate. The Red Army is closing its noose. Inside, the bunker's residents hear the faint echo of tank engines through the concrete. The sound is unmistakable, the grinding rhythm of T-34s moving closer every hour. The final orders. April 28th, Hitler gathers his senior officers for a brief meeting. He is pale, hunched, voice unsteady. Yet he speaks with calm clarity. The time has come, he says, to prepare for personal decisions. That night, Traudl Junge types his final political testament, dictated in measured, deliberate sentences. He names his successors, condemns Göring and Himmler as traitors, and appoints Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz as president and supreme commander of the armed forces. Eva Braun sits nearby, smoking. She has decided to stay with him, rejecting every offer to flee. At around midnight, in a small ceremony witnessed by Goebbels and Bormann, Hitler and Eva Braun are married. The vows are brief, the tone subdued. The witnesses sign the document with trembling hands. Afterward, champagne is opened, a rare moment of quiet cheer amid the ruin. But no one celebrates for long. Outside, the guns continue to roar. The last communications, by dawn on April 29th, only a few radio links remain functional. From the Reich Chancellery's command post, General Krebs sends one final message to General Alfred Jodl outside Berlin. Request immediate confirmation of attack by Wenck's 12th Army. Situation critical. No contact with Army Group Vistula. The reply, when it comes, is short and devastating. Wenck cannot move. Berlin will receive no relief. Hitler reads the message in silence. Then he folds it carefully and sets it aside. He spends much of the morning dictating personal messages. One to Dönitz, another to the German people, expressing gratitude to soldiers who stood faithfully in this hopeless struggle. The phrasing is cold, bureaucratic, but behind it lies a rare acknowledgement. Defeat. The garden. Above that afternoon, Hitler's aides inspect the Chancellery garden, now a cratered wasteland littered with shattered masonry. A handful of SS guards prepare barrels of fuel nearby. By order, though few yet understand why. The smell of petrol lingers in the air. By evening, Soviet forces are within 300 meters of the bunker. Machine gun fire sweeps the ruins of the Chancellery courtyard. The heavy thump of artillery echoes through the reinforced ceilings. Down below, Hitler sits in his private room, staring at the portrait of Frederick the Great. Witnesses say he murmurs softly, "No surrender." The line between command and suicide has disappeared. The decision, April 29th, near midnight, the final preparations are made. Hitler meets briefly with his adjutants. He instructs them that his body, and Eva Braun's, must not be allowed to fall into enemy hands. They are to be burned immediately after death. He shakes hands with his staff, thanking each one. Some are too stunned to reply. Others, tears in their eyes, salute silently. In the study, the doors are closed. A small table stands against the wall, a pistol resting on its surface. On another, a brass tray holds 2 cyanide capsules. The bunker falls quiet. Above, the thunder of Soviet artillery grows louder, a storm closing in on a single room. The circle is complete. The war that began with thunderous parades will end in a concrete silence beneath a city in flames. The world above is collapsing. Below, history holds its breath. Angle. A. Human. The Führerbunker was not just a command post. It was a living tomb filled with ordinary human moments. The soft tremor of fear, the small gestures of routine, the fragile veneer of normality amid annihilation. Witnesses describe an atmosphere both claustrophobic and strangely domestic. Between bombardments, the secretaries whisper about their families. Soldiers polish boots that will never step outside again. The Goebbels children, dressed in matching white dresses, play quietly in a corner room lit by a single lamp. Traudl Junge, Hitler's youngest secretary, later recalled that the air was always thick, the lights yellow, and there was never silence. Even in the quiet, one could hear the bunker breathe. Sleep becomes impossible. The thud of Soviet artillery above merges with the rhythmic hum of ventilation fans. Conversations are muted, every word cautious. Yet amid this dread, life continues. Coffee brewed from burnt grain, letters written and hidden away, birthday toasts made from whatever liquor remains. The emotional temperature shifts daily. Some cling to denial, convinced that the West will intervene before the Soviets reach them. Others withdraw entirely, their faces expressionless. The only constant is the feeling that time itself has become trapped underground. Eva Braun moves through these rooms like an apparition. To the staff, she is gentle, smiling, uncomplaining. She changes clothes daily, still painting her lips, as if maintaining a ritual of dignity against the decay around her. When she dances briefly to an old record, others watch in silence. A moment of eerie beauty surrounded by ruin. The Goebbels family embodies fanatic devotion. Magda, calm and maternal, teaches her children hymns while shells detonate above. She writes letters filled with fatal conviction that life after National Socialism is unthinkable. Her husband, Joseph Goebbels, alternates between defiant speeches and long silences, pacing the corridors, repeating the same phrase. The world will not understand. Among the officers and orderlies, exhaustion replaces ideology. Many are too young to remember anything before the war. They obey out of inertia, not belief. The last guards at the entrance joke softly to mask their dread. When it's over, one says, we'll finally sleep. There is no sound of victory in the bunker. Only the slow fading of morale, the whisper of footsteps on concrete, the faint scratching of typewriter keys, each keystroke writing history's closing chapter. At night, the secretaries huddle together, listening to the distant roar above. They share chocolate, cigarettes, sometimes tears. We stopped being afraid, Junge would say years later. There was nothing left to fear. In that truth lies the final humanity of the bunker. People reduced to stillness, continuing to perform their duties because it gives shape to the inevitable. Every typed order, every polished weapon, every salute becomes an act of ritual. A small defiance against the collapsing world outside. And in this quiet defiance, the myth of invincibility that once surrounded their leader dissolves entirely. The man who once commanded continents now speaks only to a handful of tired faces, his voice weak, his gestures small. The bunker becomes the mirror of a nation's descent, from thunderous unity to suffocating silence. Angle. B. Tactical. Operational on the maps pinned to the walls of the Führerbunker. The war is still being fought. Thin red arrows, drawn by Hitler's trembling hand, push phantom divisions toward Soviet positions that no longer exist. Every morning he studies them with the same intensity as in earlier years, his eyes scanning lines of front names. Steiner, Wenck, Busse. But these armies are illusions. By April 26th, all major communication lines are severed. The radio network between Berlin and the high command at Zossen collapses. Only fragmented Morse signals slip through, distorted, incomplete. Even these soon fade as Soviet troops occupy transmission sites. The city's defense has broken into disconnected pockets. Commanders in the field, General Helmuth Weidling of the LWII Panzer Corps among them, receive orders that are already obsolete by the time they arrive. Each district fights independently, improvising under relentless pressure. Hitler still imagines large-scale maneuvers, He orders Army Detachment Steiner to strike from the north and General Wenck's 12th Army from the west to relieve Berlin. In reality, Steiner's strength amounts to barely a few thousand men, without tanks, without fuel, facing two Soviet fronts. Wenck's units are exhausted and pinned along the Elbe. When reports reach the bunker that neither force can advance, the myth of Hitler's control disintegrates. His tirade of April 22nd becomes a turning point, not for the war, but for command itself. After that moment, he stops directing operations meaningfully. His generals know it, but continue the charade of conferences and reports, unwilling to confront him directly. Operationally, Berlin's defenses now depend on General Weidling, a professional soldier trapped by loyalty and circumstance. His command post moves constantly, from the Zoo flak tower to bunkers beneath the Reichstag. Weidling divides the city into defense sectors, labeled A through H, assigning each to remnants of Army or SS units. The weapons are mismatched: a handful of Panzerfausts, a few Tigers, anti-aircraft guns dragged to street level, and small arms scavenged from depots. Ammunition is nearly gone. Communications rely on runners, teenagers darting through collapsing streets under fire. Soviet assault groups, backed by artillery and tanks, apply overwhelming pressure. The Red Army's methodical urban warfare, block by block, building by building, erases what remains of organized resistance. Each day, front lines shift only meters, but casualties rise by the thousands. By April 28th, the Soviets have cut Berlin into isolated zones. The government quarter, where Hitler's bunker lies, is surrounded on all sides. Soviet artillery now shells Wilhelmstrasse directly. The Chancellery grounds are cratered, its marble corridors filled with debris. Inside the bunker, Hitler's staff plot on maps that bear no resemblance to reality. The radio operators can still intercept Soviet transmissions, confirming how close the front has come. Yet no one dares to bring those reports into the conference room. The only remaining operational act is communication. The last telegram sent to Donitz in northern Germany, describing a command structure that no longer functions. Orders continue to flow outward, but no replies return. In effect, the Führerbunker has become an island, cut off not only physically, but conceptually. Its operations continue out of habit, not purpose. The tragedy of these final days lies in the machinery of command still functioning amid absolute futility. Messages are formatted precisely. Reports are logged. Names are written. The hierarchy remains intact, even as the army it governs ceases to exist. This bureaucratic persistence reflects something deeper in the German war machine: its obsession with procedure, its inability to stop until every line is filled. Even at the edge of total destruction, the process remains sacred. Meanwhile, above ground, Soviet troops advance toward the Reichstag. By April 30th, at dawn, units of the 150th Rifle Division raise the red banner over its shattered dome. The city's symbolic heart has fallen. In the bunker, this event is not yet known in detail. Only the sound of constant bombardment, and the reports that Soviet forces have reached the Chancellery. The operational map now has no arrows, no counters, only empty space where divisions once stood. At that moment, command becomes theater. The actors know the play has ended, yet they continue their lines. Because that is what soldiers and bureaucrats do in the ruins of empire. And beneath those ruins, in the dim light of flickering bulbs, one man prepares to end the performance entirely. The maps will soon be irrelevant. The lines of communication will fall silent. Only the final decision remains, no longer strategic, but personal, angle C, technological, material. The Führerbunker was, in its conception, a marvel of military engineering, a fortress built for a leader who no longer trusted the surface world. It was not opulent. It was not even comfortable. It was efficient, heavy and unyielding, a machine of concrete designed to survive total war. Built beneath the Reich Chancellery Garden, the bunker sat 2 levels deep. The Vorbunker, constructed first, housed guards, kitchens, and storage rooms. Below it, The Führerbunker, completed in 1944, was a hardened command core. Concrete walls 3.5 meters thick, reinforced ceilings and steel blast doors. The rooms were small and airless, connected by narrow corridors that amplified every sound, a chair scraping, a step echoing. The air conditioning and ventilation systems were designed to filter out poison gas, a paranoia from earlier years now turned into grim necessity. Electricity came from generators above, but as the Soviet bombardment intensified, cables were severed. Lights flickered, plunging rooms into intermittent darkness. Candles and oil lamps filled the void. The bunker's telephone network once linked directly to the Reich Chancellery, the Army High Command, and even Hitler's private headquarters in Bavaria. By late April 1945, nearly all lines were dead. The few remaining routes connected only to nearby command posts, voices that spoke of defeat, retreat, or silence. Water seeped through cracks. Pumps ran constantly. When shells hit nearby, the vibration rattled dust from the ceiling, coating papers and uniforms alike. The air was thick with oil fumes and dampness. The smell of humanity, sweat, smoke, stale coffee, never left. Medical facilities were primitive. A small infirmary operated under flickering bulbs. Dr. Werner Hasse and Dr. Ludwig Stumpfegger worked in silence, their supplies dwindling. There were morphine ampules, disinfectant, gauze, and the small glass vials of cyanide, supplied by the SS. Weapons were everywhere. Pistols lay on desks. Submachine guns leaned against the walls. Hitler's personal sidearm, a Walther PPK 7.65mm, rested within arm's reach in his study. Eva Braun's was a smaller pistol of the same make. Every object within those walls now carried symbolic weight. A map pencil, a teacup, a cyanide capsule. They were tools not of command, but of control over how the story would end. The fuel stored upstairs, the barrels of gasoline positioned near the garden entrance, had a singular purpose. It was not for vehicles. It was for cremation. The bunker's logistics, once designed to sustain leadership in war, had transformed into preparations for annihilation. Even the materials themselves became metaphors for the Reich they served. Engineered to endure, yet slowly cracking under relentless pressure. In the days to come, that concrete shell would prove its resilience, surviving bombardment, fire, and decades of reconstruction. But inside it, all human systems, technological, military, and moral, had already collapsed. Angle D, leadership and moral leadership in the bunker, was no longer about strategy. It was about ritual, denial, and the management of despair. Hitler's authority remained absolute, but it had changed form. Once charismatic, now spectral, his leadership was defined not by command but by gravity, a center of psychological mass pulling everyone else inward. Witnesses recall that by late April, his appearance had deteriorated dramatically. He shuffled when he walked, his left hand trembling uncontrollably, his complexion ashen. His voice, once fiery, had become monotone. He spoke less, listened rarely, and reacted to failure with a detached calm that frightened even his closest followers. His generals, Krebs, Burgdorf, Weidling, continued to report with formality, using maps and terminology as if those gestures could hold back collapse. None dared confront him directly. To do so would have been both pointless and dangerous. Goebbels filled the moral vacuum with fanaticism. His speeches to the bunker's staff were theatrical, invoking destiny and sacrifice. To him, the fall of Berlin was not defeat, but purification, the final proof of ideological devotion. He told his aides, "The Führer's death will be the signal for renewal. The world will tremble." But outside the bunker, that world was no longer trembling. It was moving on. For others, moral certainty gave way to quiet rebellion. Officers began making private choices, to surrender, to flee, or to stay. Each decision carried immense weight, not because of external orders, but because of the moral calculus of survival versus loyalty. General Weidling, for instance, wrestled with conscience. His duty demanded defense of Berlin, His reason told him the fight was hopeless. On April 30th, he would later sign the surrender to spare the city further destruction. Inside the bunker, however, such moral reasoning was unwelcome. The system that had ruled Germany for 12 years was built on obedience, not reflection. Even in its death throes, it demanded total submission. The most haunting example came from Magda Goebbels. On the evening of April 30th and into May 1st, she and her husband made the unthinkable decision to kill their 6 children. Not from fear, but from conviction. She believed that a world without National Socialism was not worth living in. Her actions reflected the ideology's final moral bankruptcy, the transformation of belief into death itself. Hitler's own decision to end his life followed the same logic twisted inward, that destruction was preferable to defeat, that death was control, that survival was shame. The bunker thus became a theater of absolute faith and absolute collapse. No debates, no arguments, only private choices sealed behind steel doors. This was not the fall of an army. It was the implosion of a creed. And as each person in that underground labyrinth confronted their end, the meaning of leadership changed forever. From power over others to the illusion of control over one's own exit. Angle E. The enemy viewpoint above the bunker. The Soviet war machine moves with relentless precision. By April 29, 1945, Marshal Zhukov's First Belarusian Front has reached the heart of Berlin. His troops fight through smoke and dust, clearing buildings room by room. The sound of machine guns echoes through the Tiergarten. The air smells of gunpowder and brick dust. Zhukov's command posts are set up in ruined buildings near the Moltke Bridge. Reports come in hourly. Heavy resistance around the Reichstag, sniper fire from the Chancellery Quarter, German tanks disabled in the narrow streets. To the Soviet soldiers, Berlin is both victory and vengeance. They remember Stalingrad, Kursk, Leningrad. Years of blood that began with a German invasion and now end here, in the enemy's capital. But victory is costly. Soviet casualties during the battle for Berlin surpass 80,000. The fighting is brutal and chaotic. Buildings collapse, civilians are caught in the crossfire, and the city burns continuously. The Red Army's final push toward the Reich Chancellery is led by the 3rd Shock Army and 8th Guards Army, with tank brigades advancing under direct artillery support. The Reichstag, symbol of German power, is stormed on April 30th. Its walls blackened, its halls filled with debris. The raising of the victory banner atop the dome marks the psychological climax of the war in Europe. Yet beneath their boots, just a few hundred meters away, the man responsible for that war still lives. Soviet units know that Hitler is in the bunker, though its exact layout remains uncertain. Intelligence from prisoners and aerial reconnaissance suggests deep fortifications. Orders are clear. Capture the government quarter intact. Take prisoners if possible. In the last days, Soviet artillery fire is deliberately concentrated around the Chancellery Gardens, seeking to break through the entrances. But the bunker's reinforced shell holds. Its existence becomes a paradox, surrounded yet untouched. When Soviet forward units finally reach the surface ruins above it, they find only silence, smoke, debris, and the smell of burning fuel. The doors are sealed. The defenders inside, SS guards, adjutants, orderlies, are gone or dead. Later, when Soviet investigators enter the underground complex, they find signs of chaos: overturned chairs, papers scattered, half-burned documents. In one small room, a blood stain on a sofa. In another, the remains of 2 burned bodies outside in the garden. The Red Army records everything meticulously. Colonel Fyodor Yelovikov, one of the first officers to enter the Chancellery complex, notes, "The bunker was silent. There was no resistance left, only the smell of fire and death." For the Soviets, the scene confirms what they already suspect. The enemy leader is dead, by his own hand. The psychological weight of that discovery is immense. The propaganda of invincibility collapses instantly. In Moscow, the news is received with grim satisfaction, not celebration. The war in Europe is effectively over, But in those final Soviet reports there is no triumphal tone, only the language of documentation, names, times, coordinates. The conquerors record the evidence of a man's last refuge, then move on to mop up resistance elsewhere. For them, the bunker is not mythology. It is a target neutralized. For the world that will come after, it becomes something else entirely. A symbol of how power isolates itself, walls itself off, and dies alone. The concrete shell still stands, silent under the rubble. Above, the red flag waves. Below, the silence of history deepens. The next hour, the climax, will seal that silence forever. April 29, 1945. The last night, in the early hours of April 29, 1945. Berlin trembles under continuous fire. Artillery from the 79th Rifle Corps and 5th Shock Army rips through the Chancellery grounds. Every detonation above shakes dust from the concrete ceilings. Light bulbs swing on their cords. Somewhere deep in the bunker, the sound of dripping water merges with the rumble of distant tanks. The war is reduced to vibrations in the walls at 0:30 hours. In a narrow antechamber of the Führerbunker, Adolf Hitler and Eva Braun are married. The witnesses are Joseph Goebbels and Martin Bormann. The ceremony is conducted by Walter Wagner, a minor civil servant summoned from the ruins above. The registrar's uniform is stained with soot. His hands tremble as he reads the brief vows. The scene is brief and subdued. There are no flowers, no music, only the dull hum of ventilation and the occasional muffled thud of explosions. Eva Braun wears a dark dress. Her hair is neatly styled, her face calm. She signs her name, Eva Braun, now Eva Hitler, with careful precision. Hitler signs next, his handwriting still sharp but noticeably strained. When the ceremony ends, there is a faint attempt at applause, more a gesture of habit than celebration. Champagne is poured, one of the last bottles remaining. Someone offers a toast. The glasses clink softly, lost in the echoing room. "May you be happy," one voice murmurs. It sounds less like a blessing than a farewell. The testament. Immediately after the wedding, Hitler moves to his study. The air is thick, the lamp flickers. Traudl Junge and Gerda Christian sit at their typewriters, ready. He begins dictating his political testament, his final public message. His tone is deliberate, monotone, drained of passion. He reads from handwritten notes, pausing only to clear his throat. In the testament, he denounces Göring and Himmler as traitors, appoints Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz as head of state, and Joseph Goebbels as Reich Chancellor. He insists that the war was forced upon Germany by international Jewry, and that his own decision to remain in Berlin is an act of loyalty, not despair. The words are cold and bureaucratic. Not a confession, but an inventory of delusion. Then comes the personal testament. He declares that he and his wife will choose death rather than surrender. Their bodies, he instructs, must be burned immediately to prevent display or desecration. As Junge types, the sound of her keys fills the room. She tries not to look at him. She later recalled, he seemed calm, almost relieved. There was no emotion, only routine, as if he were signing off from a long day's work. At 04 hours, the documents are completed and signed by Hitler, Goebbels, Bormann, and the witnesses Bergdorf and Krebs. The papers are neatly stacked, sealed, and prepared for couriers who will attempt to smuggle them through the Soviet lines. Above, the sky glows red from fires. Below, the bunker falls into an unnatural quiet. The poison test shortly after dawn, a low conversation takes place between Hitler, his physician Dr. Hasse, and his adjutant Otto Günsche. It concerns the method of suicide. The SS has supplied cyanide capsules manufactured by IG Farben, tested for potency on captured agents. Hitler demands certainty. He cannot risk failure. At 05 hours, the order is given. The poison must be tested. The victim is Blondie, Hitler's beloved German shepherd. Hasse crushes a capsule between the dog's jaws. Within seconds, Blondie collapses. Witnesses later describe the sight as unbearable. the one creature Hitler truly loved dying in silence on the cold floor. The test confirms the cyanide's effectiveness. For the rest of the day, Blondie's body remains in the corridor. Her puppies are later killed by Linga and Gunsha to prevent their suffering. The atmosphere in the bunker shifts again, from exhaustion to finality. No one speaks of hope anymore. The couriers depart by mid-morning. Otto Gunsha organizes the dispatch of the testaments. 3 couriers, Wilhelm Sander, Heinz Lorenz, and Willy Johannmeier, are chosen. They will attempt to break through Soviet lines, carrying the documents to Donitz's headquarters at Plön. Each man receives a copy sealed in a briefcase. They shake hands with those remaining, knowing that survival is unlikely. Above ground, artillery continues relentlessly. The couriers slip out through the garden entrance, past the burned trees and shattered walls, into the ruins of the city. 2 will reach their destination weeks later. 1 will be captured. Inside the bunker, time begins to lose its shape. The morning routine. Despite the apocalyptic setting, the habits of bureaucracy persist. Telephonists maintain logs. Orderlies sweep corridors. Secretaries type minor notes. Even coffee is served at regular intervals, though the beans are ersatz and the water brown. Hitler's personal attendants notice small changes. He eats little, only a slice of bread and some soup. He thanks the staff politely, a rare gesture. His voice is softer than usual. At noon, Goebbels visits him for a final conference. They discuss the situation reports, which no longer matter. Goebbels insists that the fight must continue, that Berlin must not surrender. Hitler listens, nods faintly, and says little. Later that afternoon, he calls in his staff for brief farewells. He shakes hands with each in turn: Junge, Christian, Bormann, Burgdorf, Krebs, and Gunsha. "I thank you for your loyalty," he says quietly. "You have done your duty." There are no speeches, no displays of emotion, only formality. The last meal around 14 hours, a simple meal is served. Vegetable pasta and tea. Eva Braun eats lightly, smiling at the others. She seems serene, almost cheerful. One secretary remembers her saying, "It's all so unreal." Hitler sits beside her, silent. He feeds his dog's empty bowl a final glance, then pushes his plate away. They retire to his private quarters. Behind the heavy steel door, he speaks quietly with Gunsha one last time. He repeats the instructions for disposal of his body. "No exhibition," he says. "Burn it completely." Then he dismisses him. Outside the study, the staff stand in the corridor, motionless. The sound of gunfire outside grows louder, closer. Soviet troops are now within a few hundred meters of the bunker. The ground vibrates with each shell. At approximately 15:30, the door closes for the final time. The silence. Before, in the outer corridor, Linga and Gunsha wait. The secretaries sit together in the conference room, unable to speak. The air feels heavy, the walls too close. Minutes pass. Then, a muffled report. A single shot, flat and final, followed by nothing. Gunsha enters the study. The smell of gunpowder mixes with bitter almonds. On the sofa, Adolf Hitler sits lifeless, a pistol in his right hand. A dark stain spreads across his temple. Beside him, Eva Braun lies slumped, her face pale, a trace of cyanide foam at her lips. The room is still. The war for them is over. Gunsha and Linga wrap the bodies in gray army blankets. They carry them up the narrow stairwell, past flickering bulbs, into the blasted Chancellery garden. Above ground, the afternoon light is dim with smoke. The roar of artillery echoes across the Tiergarten. Soviet shells fall nearby, shaking the ground. The 2 men place the bodies side by side in a shallow crater near the emergency exit. SS guards pour the remaining petrol over them. 50 liters, maybe more. Gunsha strikes a match. The flames rise briefly, whipped by the wind, then settle into a smoldering blaze. The smell of burning fuel and cloth fills the air. Those who watch do so in silence. There are no words, no ceremony, only the sound of battle in the distance, and the crackle of fire consuming the remnants of an empire. In that moment, 1530, April 30th, 1945. The Third Reich dies not with a speech or a surrender, but with the hiss of gasoline and the faint rumble of approaching tanks. The fire burns quickly, reduced to charred fragments by the time the fuel is gone. Gunsche and Linge return below, sealing the door behind them. No one speaks. No one cries. They simply resume their duties, as if the ritual of destruction were another line in the day's report. The war continues for only hours more, but in the bunker, time has already stopped. Above, the Soviets tighten their ring around the chancellery. Below, the world that began in 1933 ends in smoke. The next hours will belong to those left behind, and to the machinery of surrender beginning to turn above the ruins. The fire and the echo. The fire in the Chancellery Garden burns for less than an hour. Soviet shells fall nearby, scattering soil and ash over the crater. The air is filled with the roar of artillery, smoke drifting down through the ruined buildings. From the bunker's upper entrance, Otto Gunsche and the SS guards watch until the flames fade to smoldering embers. The bodies are unrecognizable, reduced to fragments, uniforms blackened, faces gone. They pour the last of the fuel to finish the task, then retreat inside. The heavy steel door slams shut. The airlock hisses, the sound of the outside world, the explosions, the chaos, fades again into the muffled hum of the underground. Below, the mood is not relief. It is disbelief. The news moves through the bunker in whispers. The Führer is dead. The phrase feels unreal, as if spoken in a foreign language. For 12 years, the man's name has been a symbol of power. Now it is reduced to past tense. Some sit in silence, unable to react. Others pour drinks with trembling hands. Joseph Goebbels, pale and rigid, walks the corridors with fixed purpose. His wife Magda weeps briefly, then regains her composure. In the study, the sofa still smells of gunpowder. The pistol lies on the floor. A faint scorch mark darkens the wall. Traudl Junge will later remember that everyone moved carefully, speaking in hushed tones, not out of reverence, but shock. The spell of command has broken, and with it, the illusion that obedience still had meaning. Goebbels' last government in theory. Hitler's death transfers authority to Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz, hundreds of kilometers away in Flensburg. But inside the bunker, Joseph Goebbels declares himself Chancellor, Hitler's successor by written testament. He assumes control with the same theatrical conviction that once filled his radio broadcasts. He summons General Krebs and General Weidling, orders them to negotiate with the Soviets, and dictates one final proclamation for the German people. It will never be broadcast. Goebbels' voice, once powerful, now trembles. He speaks of destiny, loyalty, and vengeance, phrases echoing in the damp corridors like the last words of a dying religion. Outside, the Soviets tighten their grip on the government quarter. Tanks of the 79th Rifle Corps roll past the Brandenburg Gate. Machine gun fire ricochets through the streets around Wilhelmstrasse. The thunder never ceases. Goebbels pretends not to hear it. In the adjoining rooms, Magda Goebbels tends to her children. She brushes their hair, speaks softly, and assures them that everything will be fine soon. The children's playroom, decorated with faded drawings, becomes a place of unbearable calm amid destruction. The failed negotiation. At dawn on May 1st, General Hans Krebs emerges from the bunker under a white flag. He carries a letter from Goebbels to General Vasily Chuikov, commander of the Soviet 8th Guards Army. The letter offers a ceasefire, not unconditional surrender, but a pause to negotiate peace terms. Chuikov receives him in a basement command post near the Potsdamer Platz. The meeting lasts less than an hour. Krebs reports Hitler's death. Chuikov listens in silence. When Krebs requests an armistice, Chuikov shakes his head. "There can be no negotiation," he replies. "Only complete surrender." Krebs returns to the bunker empty-handed. His face is pale, his voice hollow. He delivers the news to Goebbels. There will be no terms. Berlin will fall. At that moment, Goebbels knows the end is absolute. The Goebbels tragedy. That afternoon, Magda Goebbels prepares for what she calls the final mercy. She has already told her friends that she cannot allow her children to grow up in a world without National Socialism. The children, Helga, Hildegard, Helmut, Holdine, Hedwig, and Haida, are given sedatives by Dr. Stumpfegger. One by one, Magda administers cyanide capsules while they sleep. No one in the bunker intervenes. The silence around her is complicit. Later, she and Joseph Goebbels leave the children's room, their faces expressionless. They ascend to the Chancellery Garden through the same passage used hours earlier for Hitler's cremation. Eyewitnesses, Günsche, Linge, and guards recall that they paused briefly at the top of the stairs, holding hands. Then they stepped outside. Minutes later, 2 gunshots echo through the ruins. The Goebbels are dead, she by cyanide, he by pistol. Their bodies are doused with petrol and burned, though hurriedly. The flames consume only partially before more shells land nearby. By nightfall, the Chancellery Garden holds only ashes, craters, and fragments of uniforms, break down with the Führer and his inner circle gone. The bunker descends into quiet disintegration. Authority evaporates. Martin Bormann, now the highest-ranking official left alive in Berlin, organizes a breakout attempt. He gathers remaining staff, SS officers, adjutants, and secretaries, intending to escape westward toward the Elbe. The plan is desperate. Move at night, follow the U-Bahn tunnels, and cross the Weidendammer Bridge under fire. At 23 hours, they prepare to leave. Traudl Junge recalls standing in the corridor, packing quickly, listening to the constant thunder outside. "We knew it was hopeless," she later said, "but staying was the same as dying." Before departure, General Weidling issues his final order to the city's defenders. The battle for Berlin is over. Every hour of resistance costs unnecessary human lives. Those still fighting must cease fire. The message spreads across the ruins by word of mouth, reaching soldiers too exhausted to respond. Above, Soviet flares illuminate the night sky. The air smells of smoke and gunpowder. The end has already happened. Only survival remains. The breakout attempt. Just after midnight, Bormann's group leaves the bunker. The corridors echo with hurried steps and whispered farewells. Junge, Linge, and others follow. They emerge through the garden entrance, the same ground where Hitler and the Goebbels were burned. The night air is heavy with ash. Soviet searchlights sweep the ruins. Machine gun fire rakes the streets. The group moves in short bursts, darting between shell craters, guided by the glow of distant fires. Near the Friedrichstrasse station, they encounter heavy resistance. Explosions light the sky. Bormann, still carrying Hitler's personal papers, is last seen trying to cross the Weidendammer Bridge alongside Dr. Ludwig Stumpfegger. Both are killed, likely by Soviet fire or suicide. Their bodies will not be identified until decades later. Others scatter through the city. Some are captured within hours. A few make it to Allied lines weeks later. Junge herself survives by blending with refugee groups. The Reich, that once stretched from the Atlantic to the Volga, ends with a handful of exhausted people stumbling through the ruins of its capital. The empty bunker when Soviet troops finally breach the Chancellery complex on May 2nd. They find the entrances sealed, the corridors dark and still. The air smells of fuel and decay. Inside, papers are scattered across floors, telephones hang from their cords, dishes lie half-finished on tables. The clocks still tick. In one corridor, they find Magda Goebbels' glasses. In another, a bloodstain where Hitler's body once lay before cremation. The Soviet search teams proceed methodically. Engineers map the structure. NKVD officers photograph every room. Artillery fire continues outside. But the war inside these walls is over. For years, confusion will cloud the discovery. The charred remains found in the garden will be examined repeatedly. Teeth fragments, jawbones, bits of uniform cloth. Eventually, dental evidence confirms what the Soviets already believe. Hitler is dead. But in 1945, amid rubble and smoke, the truth feels anticlimactic. The world's most powerful dictator has died not in battle, but in isolation, beneath his own capital. The myth, begins news of Hitler's death spread slowly and unevenly. The Soviets report it cautiously. Western allies wait for confirmation. Rumors multiply that he escaped to Argentina, that he fled by submarine, that the corpse found was a double. The chaos of the final days feeds conspiracy for decades, but those who were there, Junge, Linge, Günsche, will tell the same story, unchanged in every retelling. He died by his own hand, in that bunker, as the empire collapsed above him. For them, the memory is not mythic but mundane, a mixture of smoke, fear, and exhaustion. It was just an ending, Junge later said. Nothing more, nothing heroic. The bunker that once symbolized power has become a grave of logic and loyalty, an echo chamber of a regime that devoured itself. The last echoes fade. Above, Soviet soldiers raise their flags among the ruins. Below, only silence remains. The hum of generators still running, the scent of smoke still lingering, the air heavy with finality. The war in Europe will end within a week. But here, beneath the shattered city, the end has already happened. In whispers, fire, and ash, the quiet that followed by. The morning of May 2nd, 1945, Berlin is finished. The gunfire that had filled every hour since mid-April begins to fade into distant echoes. The smoke still rises from government buildings, but the city's heart has stopped beating. Deep beneath the ruins, the last men of the WWII Panzer Corps lower their weapons. General Helmuth Weidling, acting commander of Berlin's defense, drafts a short, final order. On the order of the Soviet High Command, hostilities are to cease at once. Any resistance is senseless. He signs it quietly, without ceremony. Then he walks out of the Chancellery ruins, hands raised, to surrender to General Zhukov. It is the last formal act of the Battle of Berlin. The city that once served as the center of a continent-spanning empire is now a landscape of smoke, corpses, and rubble. The smell of gunpowder and decay hangs over everything. Soviet soldiers move through the streets cautiously, rifles raised, passing burned-out vehicles and shattered statues. Pockets of SS resistance continue sporadically, but most defenders are too stunned or broken to fight. The Red Army has taken its prize, but victory tastes of exhaustion. The Flensburg government, hundreds of kilometers to the north, in the small port town of Flensburg, Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz receives the news of Hitler's death. It comes by courier, a typed statement signed by Hitler himself, delivered by one of the bunker messengers who miraculously broke through Soviet lines. Dönitz gathers his staff at Murwick Naval Academy, headquarters of what remains of the German command. He reads the message aloud. Hitler is dead. Dönitz is now president and supreme commander. There is no applause, no reaction, only silence. The new government forms around him. Albert Speer, Hans-Georg von Friedeburg, Lutz Schwerin von Krosigk. Their goal is not victory, but survival. They know the war is lost. Their task is to end it with minimal destruction in the West, while stalling surrender in the East long enough for civilians and soldiers to flee Soviet retribution. To the Allies, the so-called Flensburg government is little more than a fiction, a puppet shadow ruling over the ruins of a vanished state. But for a few days, it provides the illusion of continuity. Orders issued, messages sent, flags still raised. Even as the Nazi symbols are stripped from public buildings, the bureaucratic machinery continues to stamp, type, and file. For 12 years, the Reich had lived through documents and signatures. Now it dies the same way, on paper. Soviet discovery back in Berlin, Soviet command posts fill the ruins of the capital. Engineers clear mines and debris. Medical teams collect bodies from the Chancellery Garden. Soldiers, civilians, and fragments of those burned corpses that once were Hitler and Eva Braun. The investigation begins immediately. NKVD agents under Ivan Serov and Fyodor Yelovikov document the site meticulously. The bunker layout, the study, the sofa, the pistols, the remains. They recover charred bones, dental bridges, and pieces of jaw. small clues in a monumental mystery. The evidence is flown to Moscow in secrecy. Soviet Premier Joseph Stalin, ever suspicious, orders the details withheld. Publicly, the Soviet Union announces nothing definitive. Privately, the analysis confirms the truth. The fragments belong to Hitler, but Stalin prefers ambiguity. In the weeks and years to come, he tells Western leaders that Hitler may have escaped, a deliberate clouding of history meant to keep his enemies uncertain. Within the bunker, the Red Army finds what remains of ordinary life frozen in place: coffee cups, unfinished meals, scattered papers, and a typewriter with the last page of the Testament still in its roller. The lights flicker weakly from backup generators. One Soviet officer, years later, described it as a grave where people had lived. Collapse of command everywhere. The German chain of command unravels. Radio networks fall silent. Military governors vanish. Entire units surrender without orders. In the West, Allied forces under Eisenhower, Montgomery, and Bradley advance rapidly across Germany, taking hundreds of thousands of prisoners. In the East, Soviet divisions push through the countryside, occupying towns where German resistance collapses overnight. In the absence of direction, surrender becomes self-organized. Officers burn insignia. Soldiers discard weapons and raise white flags. Civilians pour into roads clogged with carts and bicycles, fleeing the Red Army's approach. The once mighty Wehrmacht dissolves into a mass of hungry, frightened men. Within days of Hitler's death, the ideological discipline that sustained the regime evaporates. The SS, once feared as the purest embodiment of loyalty, fractures into chaos, some fighting to the end, others shedding uniforms and hiding among civilians. The Nazi state, built on order and command, dies in disorder and confusion. The human cost. The Battle of Berlin leaves behind devastation beyond measure. More than 80,000 Soviet soldiers are dead, and over 300,000 wounded. On the German side, estimates exceed 100,000 soldiers and 125,000 civilians killed in just 2 weeks of fighting. Entire districts, Kreuzberg, Mitte, Charlottenburg, are reduced to ashes. Half of the city's buildings are destroyed. Infrastructure is obliterated. Water, power, and transport cease to function. Civilians emerge from basements like ghosts. Many wander the streets in shock, unable to comprehend that the Reich they were told would last 1,000 years has ended in rubble after 12. The moral landscape is no less desolate. The propaganda that promised victory to the last has dissolved into silence. The faces of those who once cheered in 1933 now stare blankly at the wreckage. As Soviet troops occupy the city, acts of vengeance unfold. Rape, looting, and summary executions sweep through neighborhoods. The victors, having endured 4 years of unimaginable suffering, exact their retribution on the conquered. The cost of Hitler's refusal to surrender, of his decision to fight until the end, is measured not in glory, but in the shattered lives of millions. The end of the 1,000-year Reich on. May 7, 1945, 1 week after the gunshot in the bunker, the German High Command signs an unconditional surrender at Reims, France. The next day, a second signing takes place in Berlin-Karlshorst to satisfy Soviet demands. At 23:01 Central European Time, all fighting ceases. World War II in Europe is officially over. In the ruins of Berlin, Soviet soldiers fire tracer rounds into the night sky in celebration. For the survivors hiding in cellars, the sound is indistinguishable from battle. Across the continent, the nightmare is ending, but the scars are permanent. 12 years of totalitarian rule, 6 years of global war, and tens of millions of dead are condensed into a single word written in red pencil on military maps: Ende. In the weeks that follow, the bunker is sealed. The entrances are filled with rubble, the corridors flooded. Only the memories of those who lived within its walls remain, each carrying a piece of the last act of the Third Reich. The fire above ground has burned out, but the myth it created is just beginning to spread. The search for proof. When Berlin falls silent, the world demands evidence. Hitler's death, though announced in fragments, is too extraordinary to be accepted without proof. The Soviets, who control the ruins of the Reich Chancellery, handle the discovery with secrecy. NKVD investigators photograph everything: the rooms, the remains, the personal effects. They interrogate surviving witnesses for days: Otto Günsche, Heinz Linge, Traudl Junge, and others captured in the city. Their testimonies are remarkably consistent. All describe the same moment: the shot, the smell of cyanide, the burning of the bodies. Yet Joseph Stalin, ever distrustful, refuses to publicize the findings. When British and American officials ask for confirmation, he suggests that Hitler may have escaped, perhaps to Spain or Argentina. For years, this ambiguity fuels rumor and propaganda. The Western Allies, relying on captured testimonies rather than physical evidence, publish cautious reports. Newspapers speculate wildly. Sightings multiply: a ghost of a man seen in the Alps, a submarine rumored to have left Hamburg. The truth remains buried under Berlin. In 1946, Soviet forensic teams recover fragments of jaw and skull from the Chancellery Garden. Dr. Faust Shkaravsky, a military pathologist, identifies the dental remains as Hitler's through comparison with records supplied by his personal dentist, Käthe Häusermann, and dental technician Fritz Echtmann. It is conclusive, but the report is classified. Stalin's paranoia ensures that uncertainty remains part of the story. For the next half-century, the location of Hitler's remains becomes one of history's strangest state secrets. The fate of the bunker after the surrender. The Soviets take control of the Chancellery complex. Engineers clear mines and debris, while teams from Smersh, Soviet counterintelligence, study the bunker in detail. They note its layout meticulously: 2 levels, 30 rooms, reinforced walls, and the heavy steel doors still intact. The smell of fuel and dampness lingers. Over the next decade, the site becomes an uneasy landmark. Locals know roughly where it lies, beneath what would later become East Berlin, but the authorities discourage any curiosity. In 1947, Soviet demolition teams destroy the surface ruins of the Reich Chancellery. Explosives collapse the bunker entrances. Rubble fills the corridors. Yet the concrete shell remains stubbornly intact beneath the ground. In the 1950s and 60s, as East Berlin rises from the rubble, the area is paved over. By the 1980s, apartment blocks and parking lots occupy the ground where the bunker once lay. The German Democratic Republic maintains silence about its exact location, fearing it could become a neo-Nazi pilgrimage site. Even today, no trace remains visible. Only a discreet information plaque marks the spot, a quiet acknowledgement of what once existed there. The bunker, like the ideology it sheltered, has been buried by both time and intention. The Donitz government and the trials, while Berlin lies in ashes, the Flensburg government survives for just 3 weeks. Grand Admiral Donitz, operating from northern Germany, issues orders for partial surrenders to the Western Allies, hoping to buy time for German refugees and soldiers to reach British or American lines. But by mid-May, Allied patience runs out. On May 23, 1945, British forces surround the Merwick headquarters. Donitz, Speer, and their ministers are arrested. The last remnant of the Third Reich ceases to exist. What follows is not vengeance, but judgment. At Nuremberg, the surviving leaders of Nazi Germany face trial for crimes against peace, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. The proceedings, held in 1945-46, bring to light the scale of the regime's atrocities: the Holocaust, the slave labor system, the aggressive wars waged in defiance of every treaty and moral law. Hitler is tried only by history, but his absence looms over the courtroom, the ghost at the center of every testimony. The tribunal ends with 12 death sentences, including Göring, who commits suicide before hanging, Ribbentrop, and Keitel. Others receive long prison terms. The judgment closes the political chapter of the Third Reich, but not its shadow. The shadow years. In the years that follow, the world rebuilds. Germany is divided, east and west, its capital split by ideology and concrete. Yet the ghost of the bunker lingers. It becomes a symbol not just of defeat, but of the dark seduction of total power. For millions, the image of Hitler's end, the dictator in his self-made tomb, stands as the final moral verdict on tyranny itself. Historians and psychologists will dissect every aspect of his final days: his health, his paranoia, his decisions. Doctors debate whether Parkinson's disease, amphetamine use, or delusion shaped his decline. Military analysts trace how operational command collapsed into obsession. But beyond the analysis lies a deeper truth: that by April 1945, the Nazi regime had become a closed system, a bunker state, feeding on its own lies. The physical structure beneath Berlin simply mirrored the mental one above it. The bunker was not just a place. It was the architecture of denial. The last remains in 1970 under orders from the KGB. The remaining fragments of Hitler's body, preserved in secret Soviet archives, are destroyed. The bones are burned again, crushed, and scattered into the Biederitz River near Magdeburg. Only small items remain: sections of jawbone and dental work stored in Moscow, verified decades later by forensic comparison with known medical X-rays. In 2000, Russian authorities allow Western researchers limited access to the evidence. In 2017, French forensic scientists confirm what the world already knew: the fragments match Hitler's anatomy beyond reasonable doubt. The myth of escape finally collapses under the weight of bone and enamel. What remains is not mystery, but the stark simplicity of fact. In that bunker, on April 30, 1945, Adolf Hitler shot himself. Eva Braun took cyanide. Their bodies were burned, their empire destroyed, their memory buried in concrete and fire. The human echo. For those who survived the bunker, life continued in strange, subdued trajectories. Traudl Junge spent years avoiding interviews, haunted by guilt. When she finally spoke publicly in her old age, she said, "I was young and ignorant. I should have known. But I didn't want to know." Otto Gunsche and Heinz Linge, both captured by the Soviets, endured a decade of interrogation before their release in 1956. Neither sought fame. Their testimonies remained consistent: quiet, factual, stripped of embellishment. Others faded into obscurity. The last of them died in the early 2000s, taking with them the final living connection to that sealed world. Their memories form a human map of the bunker. Each room, each sound, each moment preserved through the prism of trauma and regret. For them, survival was not victory. It was burden. The meaning of an end by. The end of May 1945, the Allied flags fly over every corner of Germany. The war in Europe is over. The continent is a landscape of ruins and silence. In the heart of Berlin, grass begins to grow over the rubble of the Chancellery. The earth covers the crater where Hitler's body was burned. Children play nearby, unaware of what lies beneath. The city will rise again, divided, rebuilt, and eventually reborn. But the memory of that underground chamber remains embedded in its foundations, invisible yet indelible. History's judgment is not written in vengeance, but in endurance. The buildings that once symbolized terror are gone. The streets that echoed with marching boots are filled again with life. And under it all, the bunker sleeps, a relic of the moment when absolute power finally met absolute consequence. The war has ended. The city breathes again. But humanity will spend generations studying the silence left behind. The war did not end with an explosion. It ended with silence, a silence sealed beneath 30 feet of concrete. In that silence, the image of the bunker became something larger than architecture. It became the final metaphor of a century defined by power and fear. When the flames consumed Hitler's body on April 30th, 1945, they did more than mark the end of a dictator. They illuminated the anatomy of collapse. How belief becomes blindness, how obedience becomes a trap, how a nation built on control can lose all control in a single room. The bunker was more than a shelter. It was the physical embodiment of denial. Walls built to keep out the enemy ended up keeping truth itself at bay. Maps filled with imaginary divisions became the final stage of a leader's imagination. The more reality pressed in, the deeper he retreated, until nothing remained but illusion, walls, and silence. For the people trapped there, secretaries, officers, guards, the end came not as punishment, but as realization. They had been living in a shadow world sustained by duty, unable to see the abyss that duty had built. The collapse was not sudden. It was slow, methodical, almost administrative. Deaths signed off like memoranda, lives ending with the rhythm of bureaucratic precision. That is the true horror of the bunker. Not madness, but order. Not chaos, but procedure. The anatomy of an ending. When power isolates itself, it begins to rot from within. The Führerbunker was the final proof. Every wall of concrete was a mirror reflecting the logic of tyranny, the need for control, the fear of dissent, the illusion of permanence. Inside those walls, every principle that once defined the Nazi regime, discipline, obedience, purity, collapsed inward under their own weight. In the end, the dictator who demanded total loyalty died utterly alone. The government that promised 1,000 years lasted barely 12. The ideology that claimed destiny found only dust, and yet the world above did not stop. Children were born, cities rebuilt, nations began again. The smoke cleared, and life, as it always does, returned. But beneath that renewal, a question lingered. How could a modern, cultured nation follow one man into catastrophe? The answer, whispered through history, lies in the bunker itself, not in the violence, but in the surrender of thought, not in hatred alone, but in the comfort of obedience. The bunker was the final, physical expression of that surrender, a world where no dissent existed, where every word confirmed the leader's illusion, where reality ended at the walls. When the walls collapsed, so did the illusion. Lessons in silence. Decades later, the site of the Führerbunker is unmarked, hidden beneath parking lots and apartments. Tourists in Berlin walk above it without knowing. Children play nearby. There is no monument, no stone, no eternal flame. Only silence. That silence is deliberate. Germany chose to remember through absence, not glorifying the ruins, but erasing their power. And perhaps that is the most fitting memorial. Because history does not need shrines to remember evil. It needs memory that breathes, questions, and teaches. The story of the bunker reminds us that tyranny rarely ends in grandeur. It ends in small rooms, with frightened people doing their jobs, waiting for orders that no longer matter. It ends not with victory or defeat, but with the slow realization that truth has left the room. The human distance. Those who survived the bunker spoke later with remarkable clarity. They did not describe monsters. They described exhaustion, routine, fear. They spoke of the strange calm that comes when everything is lost, and duty remains the only thing left to hold. That, too, is part of the human story, the capacity to continue, even in ruin. It is easy, in hindsight, to condemn. Harder to understand how ordinary people can become cogs in extraordinary evil. The bunker does not excuse them, but it explains the system that trapped them. A hierarchy that rewarded silence, punished doubt, and sanctified obedience. And so the bunker's lesson endures, not only as history, but as warning. Every society builds its own walls of comfort. Every ideology creates its own sealed rooms. The moment we stop questioning the voice at the center, we begin to descend the stairs ourselves. What remains? Nothing of Hitler's world remains. The Reich's capital is now a city of light and life, open to all nations. The bunker is gone. The walls that once imprisoned truth have been replaced by glass and sky. But the echoes persist, not in stone, but in understanding. For the historian, the bunker is a cautionary space. For the philosopher, it is a mirror. For the human heart, it is a reminder of how far we can fall when we surrender to fear disguised as faith. The final hours of the Third Reich were not about battles or politics. They were about the end of illusion, the moment when a nation's myth burned down to ash, and the world saw in the ruins what power truly costs. Epilogue. In the quiet after destruction, history speaks softly. It says that every tyranny carries its own end inside it, that every wall built to protect a lie becomes a tomb for the liar. Berlin learned that lesson in fire and dust. The world, perhaps, is still learning it. And so we end where we began. Underground, in that dim corridor where the lights flickered and the typewriters stopped. The footsteps have faded. The voices are gone. Only the clock remains, ticking softly in the dark, marking not the time of death, but the moment humanity decided to remember. If history fascinates you, don't just watch it, enter it. Subscribe for more real stories that change the world. One decision, one moment, one bunker at a time. April 1945. Berlin is burning above, and beneath its ruins, Adolf Hitler paces in silence 30 feet underground. The walls of his bunker shake with Soviet artillery. The air reeks of oil, dust, and fear. Maps curl from the heat. Phones are dead, and every arrow on the table points to nowhere. Outside, the Red Army is 200 meters away. Inside, the leader who once ruled half of Europe reaches for a pistol and a vial of cyanide. In the next 15 minutes, the most feared man in the world will vanish. Not in battle, but in a whisper that ends a war and begins a myth. The collapse begins January 1945. The Eastern Front is no longer a line. It is a flood. Soviet armies, over 2 million strong, surge westward from the Vistula River. The once mighty Wehrmacht is a shattered shadow, held together by patches of SS divisions, exhausted infantry, and boys too young to shave. In the east, the Red Army's Vistula-Oder offensive tears open the German defenses in less than 2 weeks. By January 25th, Marshal Georgy Zhukov's First Belarusian Front has driven to within 70 kilometers of Berlin. Towns like Poznan and Kustrin fall in days. Refugee columns choke the frozen roads. Carts, bicycles, anything with wheels, moving west ahead of the Soviet advance. Inside the Reich Chancellery, Hitler refuses to see the reality forming on his maps. Every morning he demands situation reports. Where is Steiner? Where is Wenck? His generals know the answers but choose their words carefully. To contradict him now is to be dismissed, or worse. The Nazi capital, once filled with ceremonial parades, has become a fortress in ruins. Concrete barricades cross the grand boulevards. The Tiergarten is an artillery park. Anti-aircraft guns, designed for the skies, are turned horizontally toward the suburbs. The propaganda ministry still speaks of counterattacks and secret weapons. But the citizens of Berlin, those who can still hear the radio over the shelling, already understand. The end is coming, and it is coming fast. The bunker beneath the Chancellery Gardens, 30 feet below ground. The Führerbunker was designed for endurance, not comfort. Constructed in 1944 as an expansion of an earlier air raid shelter, the Führerbunker, it consists of narrow concrete corridors, 3.5 meters thick, connected by steel doors. The air is stale. Ventilation pipes groan under the strain of constant bombardment. Water seeps through the walls. The lighting, a perpetual yellow, gives every face a waxen hue. Rooms are cramped, barely large enough for a cot, a table, and a small wash basin. Hitler's quarters are slightly larger. A small study, a bedroom, and an adjoining sitting room. On the wall hangs a portrait of Frederick the Great, the king who, in Hitler's mind, had once faced hopeless odds and triumphed. Each morning, the same ritual unfolds. A map conference, then meals served by his aides Heinz Linge and Otto Günsche. Hitler's menu has shrunk to the austere habits of a vegetarian. Rice, mashed potatoes, and canned vegetables. Coffee, heavily sweetened, remains his only indulgence. The temperature swings between suffocating warmth and chilling damp. The air filtration system rattles constantly. The only sense of time comes from the hands of a clock that never stops ticking. a clock whose sound everyone in the bunker will remember for the rest of their lives. The Final Circle by April 1945. Hitler's inner circle has shrunk to the utterly devoted and the utterly trapped. There is Eva Braun, his longtime companion, now brought into the bunker permanently. She moves quietly, a polite ghost among soldiers and stenographers, never speaking of fear, always maintaining composure. Then Joseph Goebbels, the fanatical minister of propaganda, and his wife Magda, who bring their 6 children into the underground shelter. Blonde-haired symbols of the Aryan ideal, now confined beneath concrete. Martin Bormann, Hitler's private secretary, manages messages and papers, though almost none now reach the outside world. General Wilhelm Burgdorf and General Hans Krebs serve as the final military staff, both veterans of earlier triumphs, now prisoners of loyalty. Traudl Junge and Gerda Christian, the young secretaries, type Hitler's last dictations, fingers shaking only when no one is watching. There are guards, orderlies, telephonists, cooks, and messengers, about 50 people in total, who live in this sealed world, listening to the muffled thunder of artillery above. They still call him Der Führer, but even that word is starting to lose meaning. The phantom divisions outside. The situation is beyond redemption. Berlin's defenses, the so-called Fortress Berlin, are manned by a patchwork of Wehrmacht remnants, Volkssturm, civilian militia, and Hitler Youth. Boys of 15 and men of 60 carry Panzerfausts against Soviet tanks. Hitler, isolated from reality, issues orders to imaginary divisions. He insists that Army Detachment Steiner will counterattack the northern flank of the Soviet advance and relieve the city. Maps are drawn, arrows are placed, but Steiner's forces are almost non-existent, a handful of exhausted battalions without fuel, without artillery. When word finally reaches Hitler that Steiner cannot move, witnesses say he erupts in a rage unlike any before. The tirade lasts for minutes. He screams at generals who stand silently before him, Keitel, Jodl, Burgdorf, Krebs, accusing them all of betrayal and cowardice. Then abruptly he collapses into a chair. "The war is lost," he says quietly. It is the first time he has said those words aloud, but even then he refuses surrender. He will not leave Berlin. He will not negotiate. In his mind, the city and his life are bound together. One must fall with the other. Encirclement. By April 25th, Berlin is completely surrounded. From the north, Zhukov's First Belarusian Front crushes its way through the suburbs of Pankow and Wedding. From the south, Konev's First Ukrainian Front closes in from Tempelhof and Neukölln. Soviet artillery units are positioned less than 2 kilometers from the Reich Chancellery. The noise never stops. Day and night, shells land across Wilhelmstrasse and the Tiergarten. Fires consume the upper floors of government buildings. The smell of burning oil seeps down into the bunker through the ventilation shafts. The last functioning airstrip, Tempelhof, falls to the Soviets on April 26th. The Fliegerhorst Gatow is under fire. Supply aircraft can no longer land. Only one small garden entrance remains open, where couriers risk sniper fire to deliver dwindling telegrams and reports. Inside, Hitler continues to hold conferences in the map room, his trembling hand tracing front lines that no longer exist. Each red arrow is a fiction, each report a ghost. Still, the atmosphere remains disciplined. Orders are written. Units are mentioned as if they are intact. The machinery of command keeps turning, even as the building above it disintegrates. The routine of defeat each day follows a mechanical rhythm. Hitler wakes late, around noon. A briefing follows, always grim, but reported in cautious tones. Lunch is taken in silence, usually with Goebbels or Bormann. Afterward, he walks the short corridor between his rooms, sometimes dictating notes or reminiscing about past battles. The secretaries recall his voice growing softer, slower, as if drifting away from the present. He speaks often of Frederick the Great, of the Prussian king who had once faced invasion from all sides and yet survived. The implication is clear, that history might repeat itself, if only through willpower. But outside the bunker, The Third Reich is evaporating. Radio links to army commands fall silent. Communications with Admiral Dönitz in northern Germany are sporadic. Messages from Hermann Göring and Heinrich Himmler carry betrayal disguised as pragmatism. Göring suggests assuming leadership. Himmler begins secret surrender talks. Each revelation further isolates Hitler. He stops trusting everyone except Goebbels and Bormann. His circle closes tighter. By April 27th, he orders that anyone attempting to flee Berlin without authorization be shot. The bunker becomes a fortress of loyalty and fear. And yet, beneath that fear, the end is unmistakably near. The walls tremble. Dust falls with every distant explosion. The sound of Soviet Katyusha rockets begins to mix with the short bursts of machine guns only streets away. No one talks about escape anymore, only about timing. At this point, the staff move quietly, their footsteps measured, their faces pale. Hitler's doctors, Dr. Ludwig Stumpfegger and Dr. Werner Hasse, prepare medical supplies without explaining why. Cyanide capsules, labeled discreetly, are stored in envelopes. The bunker, once an instrument of protection, is becoming a tomb. And still, each morning, the ritual continues. Reports, maps, orders. Until one order, the last, will be written not for battle, but for death. The walls of the bunker echo with the hum of failing generators. Above, the Soviet front is closing in. The city that once defined his power is collapsing into ash. Inside, the man who commanded millions now rules over silence.